Hey y'all, producer Drew here, with a little bit of housekeeping before we get started today. So on today's episode, we're going to have a guest host, Rachel Fludd. You're going to hear from her in just a moment, right after the music cue. But I wanted to start things out with a quick clarification. So when we recorded this, Rachel was working in our engagement department, and she's since been offered a new opportunity at another cultural organization. We have really loved working with Rachel over the last year, and it was bittersweet, but I will say, as being one of the final projects she got to do, she did a wonderful job with today's podcast. I'm excited for all of you to hear it. She brought in some wonderful guests. She's planned out some fantastic conversations, and I think it's going to be well worth your time. So let's just go ahead and jump into the episode here. I hope everybody enjoys the show.
Welcome to Binder. I'm your host, Rachel Fludd.
Hey y'all, producer Drew here. It is a pleasure to be back in the studio. A big thing that we do here on Binder Podcast is I am always trying to look out for new talent and folks that can bring different perspectives because, I can only talk about things for so long, and sometimes it's just nice to hear from someone else. And so today, actually, I am here to introduce you to our guest host for the podcast. Her name's Rachel Fludd. She's the engagement assistant here at the museum, and she has brought a very special project that is close to her heart to work with us on today. And so, Rachel, why don't you introduce yourselves to our audiences? Tell us a little bit about what you do here and stuff like that.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Drew. So I am the engagement assistant. So I do a little bit of everything. So that could be arts research, programming, assisting with layouts, events, floor plans, tracking deadlines within our department, maybe some AV and tech sound and all of that, those things. So yeah, a little bit of everything, jack of all trades.
Yeah, and you're going to continue to be a jack of all trades today as you take on a whole new role, huh?
Yeah.
So, for listeners at home, you may have heard that we just had a new exhibition open here at the Columbia Museum of Art. It is called Rodney McMillian, A Son of the Soil. Rodney originally is actually from the Columbia area, but he now lives and works in Los Angeles. And so we're really excited to have this exhibition. It broadly is dealing with a lot of ideas, but it's a lot of concepts around the land and the histories that might be kind of embedded within the land and what kind of effect that might have on the folks that live there. And so Rachel came to me a few months ago with a very cool idea that she had to sort of talk about these themes and ideas and use some community partners to discuss it. So can you tell me a little bit about this project, Rachel, and what your plans are for it and just anything else you want to share?
Yeah, of course. So Rodney McMillian's work, it confronts a lot of complex narratives around the American identity, particularly dealing with race, class, land, and the body kind of within those cultural and political landscapes of the American South. And he challenges a lot of those historical narratives. So he's highlighting lived experiences within the Black community. So this podcast is going to be featuring community members, activists, artists, and historians who connect to those themes of memory, inequality, and belonging. So essentially, I wanted to explore stories that reflect that ongoing presence of history in contemporary lives. So the goal of the podcast is to really create space for sustained reflection beyond the gallery walls.
Yeah. I think we're all in for a really interesting treat today. And you've brought in several really great guests to help you along the way. Can you tell me about who we're going to hear from today?
Yeah, of course. So we'll be hearing from Cecil Williams, who is a photographer. He also is opening up his own museum of the civil rights.
Kind of another jack of all trades.
Yeah. The Civil Rights Museum in Orangeburg, South Carolina. We'll be hearing from Darion McCloud. Darion is a Columbia native. Many people know him as a performer, an actor, director, another jack of all trades. Xavier Blake, he is the executive director of One Columbia for Arts and Culture, but he has over 20 years of experience in media coverage. He's dedicated to the arts and culture sector, especially here in Columbia and really throughout South Carolina.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really great episode. I am so excited to hear your conversations with all of them. So why don't we just jump right in and listen to this interview that you previously recorded during Black History Month with Cecil Williams.
So today we are honored to be joined remotely by Cecil Williams, legendary civil rights photographer and founder of the Cecil Williams South Carolina Rights Museum. His work preserved powerful everyday stories of the civil rights movement in South Carolina, and we're grateful to have him with us today. Welcome, Mr. Williams.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here with you this morning.
Great. Let's get started. So at the age of 14, you were one of 25 photographers to shoot for Jet magazine. How did you first get into photography, and how did you know it could be used for documenting history?
Well, beginning in photography at 9, by 14, I thought I was pretty professional. But actually, at that time, I was still freelancing for Jet. But actually, I started working for Jet at 18 years old. And so that was a great thrill to me to be working for a national publication.
Okay. You also photographed Coretta Scott King during the Charleston hospital workers' strike. What do you remember most about that day?
Well, that was a very memorable event that I recall very clearly, even to this day, so many years after that. And it was not that it was a single day. It lasted quite a while. But of course, Mrs. King, I believe, came there maybe 2 times. And I photographed her, I think, on Mother's Day, marching in the streets of Charleston. And that was quite thrilling. But more so, as a photographer, sometimes you have might say the backstory that's not told. For example, with SLED, Emmanuel Hickson and another SLED officer, I actually rode to the airport to pick up Mrs. King. And so I had those inside opportunities to, again, engage with the person who was the late widow, of course, of the Reverend Martin Luther King. And so stories like that and memories like that come to mind when I begin to think about those days.
And what is something that you remember about Miss King?
Well, she was a very gracious person. She had a great personality. She talked, and she didn't seem to be uppity, as I would call it, but just a very, very nice person. And when I photographed her in the streets, of course, she was symbolically giving herself to the movement, because the situation was the African-American workers were only paid half the wages of other workers. And that was so unfair for that to happen. And they had to march for many, many months to change that system. And gradually they did win. At a cost to the state of South Carolina, I understand, about $30 million. It would have been cheaper for them just to go ahead and give them the wages they were deserved rather than, say, pay $30 million doing all of the turmoil that was going on in Charleston.
Mm. When you were documenting Harvey Gantt's desegregation of Clemson, did you understand the significance in the moment, or how was that experience?
Well, yes, Harvey Gantt, of course, from Charleston, South Carolina. We had become friends earlier than when he made his appearance on the campus of Clemson University. Actually, since he and I really were trying to do the same thing. See, earlier than that, I too wanted to study architecture, and I always loved photography, and I have always been in photography. But when I graduated from high school, I wanted to study architecture, and the only place in the state you could was, of course, Clemson University, which offered degrees. And since I couldn't get an application blank from them to apply, I never was able to go. But Harvey Gantt, through the assistance of writing and his attorneys and actually a suit, again, was able to enter Clemson University. So I followed that for Jet. I was on assignment for Jet. And I was one of the 4 African Americans on the campus on the morning when Harvey Gantt stepped onto the campus and became a student at Clemson University. That too has so many memories of that when it happened. And it's in my mind, it's almost as if it were last week or last month. Very, very clear. I do remember that just like it is cold now in February, it was cold then, I believe, in January as well. Yes.
Another question that I do want to ask you, I hope that you haven't got asked this question a lot, but what is your favorite photo that you've taken that isn't always asked about?
Well, all of my photographs are favorite to me, and I have a few special ones. Though there's a picture of a little boy shaking his mother's hand that, again, I think has become symbolic and also iconic to the civil rights movement. It says so much, and we will, as we are building the new Civil Rights Museum here in Orangeburg, that would be one of our featured pictures, but it's one of my favorites as well.
Okay, I can't wait to come and see it. So I want to switch gears a little bit. First, once you've spent years documenting history as it happens, you start to kind of notice how stories are changing over time. And there's one moment in South Carolina's history that feels especially important when we talk about land, memory, and the stories that get erased, and that's the Orangeburg Massacre. So for listeners who may not know, can you share what happened during the Orangeburg Massacre? What was it and what happened that night?
The Orangeburg Massacre was an event that happened in Orangeburg, South Carolina on February the 8th, 1968. By that time, the rest of the state had again become going along with the civil rights laws that had been passed by Congress and President Johnson, the Accommodation Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, all that had taken place again in the mid-1960s, 63, 64, and 65. And so the bowling lanes that prohibited blacks from entering Orangeburg, South Carolina, it represented a pocket of resistance. There were very few places like that, but that was one of the places. But it infuriated the African-American community because if you wanted to bowl, you would have to go all the way to Charleston, 150 miles round trip, or 100 miles round trip to Columbia to bowl. And that was so unnecessary. So in effect, the bowling lanes was really violating the law. They were not supposed to, again, prohibit people of color from entering just because of their race. So as a photographer for South Carolina State and Claflin University during that time, I remember almost every detail of what went on and what transpired. And in fact, I was on the campus up until 1 hour before the shooting started. But I'm so very pleased that God protected me. I got hungry and I left the campus. And again, that tragedy occurred about 10 o'clock that evening, where 3 students were killed and over 28 injured. And that is called the Orangeburg Massacre.
What did it mean to photograph something that the state was actively trying to silence?
Well, again, things like that really can't be hidden for very long. The truth gets out. You can crush the truth to the ground, and it always has a way of coming to the top again and resurfacing. So it's not too much. And the same thing about what's happened today in America, for example. The effort by the administration to tone down African-American history, to not put it in history books, to not tell the truth about slavery. In my opinion, it makes it counterproductive because young minds, when you say don't want them to do something, actually, had you not said anything, it would have been better because now that you don't want them to do that, it's more likely they will do it. Mm-hmm. So whether they try to keep it out of our history books, social media, or whatever, again, it will resurface. And the administration will fail to do this because in people's hearts and minds, they know that it's best to let the truth speak for itself. In Nazi Germany, they tried to have the books burned that spoke the truth. It was not successful. And seemingly the administration has not really been a student of history because they would know that all doing history when things like trying to ban the books or keep things out of being published and you aren't telling the truth, it has a way to rise to the surface anyway.
Right. When we think about all the things that are going on, even with the Orangeburg Massacre, banning books, just the state of our world, what do you think happens to a community when that trauma is never fully acknowledged?
Well, actually, I think the truth marches on and people, regardless of the government trying to put a stamp on it or clamp on it or to try to suppress it or keep it, say, from being, it still comes out anyway because people talk and they know it's there. Plus, from their parents, they have learned differently. And so there's always been that hint that something's wrong. Slavery in America, for example, was one of those institutions that, again, was anti-mankind, so to speak. Again, to enslave people, to have them to work and punish them and have them and to have brought people into this country. It was wrong. It was you might say, basic wrong in the founding of this country. In fact, even today, 250 years later, we still have not really completely moved to the point where this country is a country that is without bias. and color still means something in America 250 years later. So it's a continuing struggle to, again, bring about these changes. But people like me, old enough to remember these days, we know it won't last. It's going to continue to, again, be for the benefit of mankind. Freedom, justice, and equality. It marches on.
So living in Orangeburg now, does the land feel different knowing what happened there? Or how do you think the community carries that memory today?
Well, coincidentally, speaking about land, when I was on the campus the next morning where I picked up some of the shotgun shells and other debris that had been left over from February 8th and the incident that happened there, I picked up about a dozen shotgun shells. The Highway Patrol used shotguns to shoot human beings, normally a double gauge shotgun shell, and that weapon is used to shoot big game. But here, they chose to use that against human beings. So the fact that this was done itself was a wrong. They could have used tear gas. They could have used non-lethal weapons. There were many choices they could have engaged in, but they chose not to. So this story, the Orangeburg Massacre, still rings loud and clear in the African-American community, especially here in Orangeburg, where yesterday there was a memorial service held, as it has been held for the last 58 years, to honor these young men and these brave students, again, who faced lethal fire and who, in fact, gave their lives and their bodies in the pursuit of freedom and justice and equality. So it's something that should never be erased from our history books. In the museum we're building in Orangeburg, the South Carolina Civil Rights Museum, one of the largest exhibits in our museum will be that of the Orangeburg Massacre. We're not going to let the story die. It will forever ring out.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. So when we look back at the civil rights movement and the Orangeburg Massacre, what responsibility do we have today to tell those stories differently?
Well, old soldiers like myself, and I consider myself a soldier, a veteran of the South Carolina civil rights movement, I'm going to say transformation. We know that eventually right will win. In fact, the Reverend Martin Luther King says it best. The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So justice will triumph. It will happen no matter who tries to stand in its way. And the truth always comes out. So as we look forward in celebration here, Martin Luther King's birthday last month, and again, Black History Month now, we know in our hearts and our souls that, again, we must be patient. Yet history and the arc is not bent just automatically. It takes individuals like you and I. It takes us to not give up and not give in and to push forward so that, again, we can overcome whatever the obstacle must be. And I'd also like to mention that there have always been more good people than there have been bad people. And even on the campus on February the 8th, 1968, when the 9 white highway patrolmen shot the students, actually, it could have been worse. Chief Pete Storm ordered 30 highway patrolmen to load their weapons, to go up on the hill, unprovoked now, to begin shooting the students. But out of those 30, only 9 obeyed his command to do that. So even then, in 1968, you see, there were 21 highway patrolmen who said, no, that is wrong. They disobeyed the highest ranked law enforcement officer in the state. They could have been fired, but they knew in their hearts that they weren't going to take lives, and they disobeyed his command. And so they are good-hearted people there. They were good-hearted people back then, and they are good people today.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important to share both sides of the story. So I have one last question for you. What advice would you give to young artists, photographers, and documentarians today?
Well, I've been asked that question often, and I don't have all the answers, but I guess in a way I would say that be diligent. If you're involved in something, of course, become good at it, specialize in something. You can't do everything. You can't be a Renaissance person to be just everything, but specialize in something, become good at it, learn as much as you can about that subject, and then go forward. Yes, in classrooms, in the educational environment, you can learn things. It's important. But you also have to be disciplined to on your own when you aren't being judged or graded to learn as much as you can about whatever it is you're interested in. That's part of the process of really becoming good. But in today's society, don't just try to get by and be good. Be excellent in whatever you do. And I've always tried to do that. And again, if I'm using in Orangeburg, where we will, by the way, be using cutting edge technology, state of the art technology to show and display our stories. For example, with today's digital technology, there's some of our pictures that, again, back during those days, I photographed them in black and white. And historians don't necessarily like this, but we're going to err, you might say, on the side of our visitors. What's wrong if we have the capability today to faithfully turn them into color? We didn't engage in the civil rights movement years in black and white. Our memory and our mind, we see things and visualize it in color. And if someone tells me, well, you're not supposed to do that, then I'm going to ask them, well, what about that painting of George Washington that was painted over 200 years ago of him crossing the Delaware River? That's in full color, which, by the way, is the only thing I can remember from my 8th grade history book. What about that? That wasn't painted in black and white, and it didn't happen in black and white. So even though we'll be one of the first museums in this country to do that, we're going steadfast into doing things like that to make it a museum that will attract everyone.
Okay, so today we are joined by Xavier Blake, a South Carolina arts and public media leader who has spent more than 20 years championing culture and amplifying diverse voices through his work with South Carolina ETV, the Nickelodeon Theater, and WMHT in New York. He's also the executive director of One Columbia for Arts and Culture. He's also a native of Bamberg, South Carolina. Xavier brings a deep understanding of how media, memory, and public symbolism shape our collective history. So welcome, Xavier.
Man, that's a really nice introduction. Thank you. And to hear it's been over 20 years also makes you understand I'm getting very old. But thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you. So today I want to talk about something that happened in 2015. So South Carolina has experienced a historic and emotional turning point when the Confederate flag was removed from the State House. For many, that moment represented more than policy. It represented memory, identity, and a long overdue reckoning. So can you take us back to that day, and what do you remember feeling or witnessing?
Yeah, I remember it was very hot. But before I talk about 2015, I was also with ETV in 2000 when the flag first came off of the top of the dome. So that day was also a very interesting day. There was a big debate about it. Governor Beasley proposed it back in 1998, I think, and it finally happened in 2000. And I had just started working at ETV then. So I started working in January. The flag came down in July, which was really strange. And that day, it was this huge production. There were so many people there. And I also remember it feeling very tense. It felt like something could happen at any moment. It didn't feel like any unification, any consensus, any agreement. And it just felt really, really almost unsafe to be there. And the reason I bring that up because in 2015, it felt completely different. There was a sense of community. There was a sense of joy. And I think there was a sense of, accomplishment too, for something that needed to be done after it's been so long. It didn't feel tense at all. There was a joyous feeling. People were singing and celebrating. And that was really, really nice to see, especially after the tragedy that happened at Mother Emanuel.
Yeah. 15 years later is how times have changed. So it's nice to hear that it was a joyous experience. So something I want to ask you, as someone from Bamberg, how does that moment resonate with you differently?
Yeah, growing up, the Confederate flag was ever present in country towns, small towns. People had it, flying. People had it in their trucks, and we always knew it was such a divisive symbol because of what it stood for. And I think for me, growing up in a small town that I still go back to a lot, I think you can sometimes still feel the separation. But I think that flag coming down showed everybody, especially in Bamberg and around the state, that we are trying to come together in a different kind of way. There's certainly still a lot of work to do. And I know a lot of folks say that the flag is just a symbol. But I think symbols are very powerful.
Yeah.
And when you can take a symbol like that that's been so divisive over so many years and remove it and put it in its proper place historically, and at the people's house, it really makes a big difference in how people go about their lives.
Yeah. The one thing I do remember about this day is, so my grandmother, she's from Nichols, South Carolina.
Oh, yeah.
So it's this very small rural town in Horry County. And I remember in 2015, she called my mom first, and she could barely speak. It was just tears of joy. And we were like, just what's going on? What's going on? And she was telling us about how the flag came down and how she felt. Because kind of like Bamberg, she grew up in that everyone's, in their trucks with the flags just waving around. It's hard to kind of get places, especially in that area.
Sure.
And it was just a very big moment for her specifically.
Yeah, because my dad always talks about, he was at work one day and this gentleman offered to give him a ride home, and the dad got in and he looked up and he had a Confederate flag at the top of his pickup truck. And immediately you assume maybe I'm not safe. Nothing happened. My dad got home safely, but again, it's such a stark reminder of what that flag means to certain groups of people. I'll tell you something else that was interesting about 2015 that was starkly different than 2000. The ceremony in 2000 took probably an hour and a half. There was just processional. There was this huge ceremony, speeches, all of this stuff. But in 2015, it was a very succinct ceremony. The folks came out on the State House steps. The processional came out. They marched up to the flag. They took it down and they marched off. And it was over. Nobody said anything. There were not any words. It was just a moment of taking the flag down because all the discussion had already been had between the debates and the conversations leading up to it, which was also, I thought was an interesting part of that whole process is how they got to it. The House and the Senate debated for days, long nights, because they had passed a provision at the State House that you couldn't remove a piece of memorabilia like that without a 2/3 or 75% vote of each chamber, which made it very difficult. And so they had to get to that consensus. And so it was also really cool to see the process of how that worked in agreement with people and people saying why the flag should come down. It was just a really neat process to see how people came together in a time of really, really stark tragedy.
And that silence, did it feel like a long overdue kind of breath? Did it feel like I can breathe a little bit easier now? Yeah,
I think that's a good way to put it. I watch a lot of sports on TV, and sometimes announcers in a very big moment just won't say a word. They call it laying out. They don't say anything. And I think it was really cool that day to not have people say anything. I think people were there, taking in the moment, understanding the magnitude of the moment in their silence and having the ability to be able to think about that individually, but also collectively as a group while it was happening, which was really neat.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about media coverage during that day. So how did the media coverage kind of shape how people understood that moment?
That's a good question. There were news stations there from all over the country. I remember because I was standing at the very base of the flag pole. So I was in every news shot all over the country, which was interesting because my friends were texting me while I was trying to work. Like, I see you on TV. And I think it was really kind of a way that the national media put a spotlight on Columbia, South Carolina at a moment when Columbia really did something positive. I think sometimes the South can get a really bad reputation around the country. And I moved to New York and, like, you from the South? Like, yeah, I'm from the South. And, it comes with a certain connotation. But I think being able to share that moment with the world in a moment when we really needed to do the right thing, and we did, was really powerful to kind of change the narrative about what the South is and who we are.
Yeah. I'm also slightly northern, originally from here, but grew up in Connecticut. Yep. And you're right. The South tends to have a negative connotation to it. And, I always tell my northern friends, like, there are stories that we talk about that have meaning, So I want to ask a question. So what stories were amplified and what stories were left out to you when you were growing up?
Oh, well, the very first one, your very first interview, Cecil Williams. The Orangeburg Massacre was something that I never learned about. I grew up in Bamberg, South Carolina. We're literally 15 minutes away from campus, maybe 20, 15 if you drive fast. But that story was never talked about. And it was a massacre. It was state-sanctioned violence against kids at a college, unarmed kids at a college, simply protesting for equal rights. And I think sometimes a lot of narratives in the South are left out of conversations because, sadly, the victor gets to tell the history. I think South Carolina is a tremendous, rich, deep history of civil rights actions and movements and protests, and we don't hear about it a lot. Everybody knows Brown v. Board, but Brown v. Board started in South Carolina. I think there are a lot of things, narratives that need to be told better. I believe South Carolina is the pinnacle of the civil rights movement in the South, even though Alabama and Mississippi kind of take that mantle. I think a lot of things happen here we just don't talk about. And that's why it's important to tell those stories. I mean, I think what this series you're doing now is super important because storytelling and memories, they go away. People get older and people pass away and you lose those stories if you don't capture them. And stories have a tremendous power to change the narrative of people and place.
Yeah, I agree. I think, now we're 9 years later, which is crazy to think about. And so for you, when the flag was taken down, was this a moment of conclusion or was this the beginning of a longer conversation?
Oh, absolutely a longer conversation. I think things certainly happen in process, but the process of reconciliation and forgiveness and remembrance and growth always should be happening. When the shooting happened in Charleston, I actually went to Charleston the very next day for ETV to go down and just see what the feelings were. And so I kind of walked the streets. I had a reporter with me. She and I kind of walked the streets and talked to people. And we went to churches and we went to prayer services. And we did all these things in the community down there that was just really, really powerful. And you can tell the hurt that happened from what happened. Mm-hmm. And I think hurt like that takes more than 9 years to get over.
Absolutely.
And I think the conversation certainly started. The conversations will always be continuing. The flag not being at the State House will change the narrative of South Carolina, of Columbia over time. I also think they're adding a sculpture of Robert Smalls onto the State House grounds in the upcoming, I think, this year. We did a documentary about the flag coming down called Downing the Flag. And one of the guys said something, we interviewed him, and he said, sometimes the like of something being there is also a message too, right? So something not being there also tells as much a story as something being there. And so there was no individual statues of a Black South Carolinian on the State House grounds. Robert Smalls would be the first. So again, the lack of something being there tells a story too. Ben Tillman's on the State House grounds. Terrible human being during Reconstruction. But again, the lack of telling stories of diversity on the State House grounds was also a problem. We got a long way to go, and we got work to do. But I'm an eternal optimist, and I think there are more good than bad. And I've met incredible people across this state doing incredible work in this space to kind of make sure we reconcile and become all we can be here in South Carolina.
Thank you for that. So coming to our final question, as someone who has spent their career amplifying diverse voices, what responsibility do cultural institutions and media organizations have when it comes to telling these difficult histories?
Oh, they have a tremendous responsibility. We're very fortunate here in Columbia that most of our cultural institutions do a really nice job. CMA, you guys do a wonderful job of highlighting stories. The State Museum does a wonderful job of highlighting stories. One Columbia, we work on a project right now to highlight the historical Black neighborhoods in town. Historic Columbia, they've done a tremendous job redoing their interpretation of the houses over on their property. I think when you add these stories into the history of a place, it makes the place more rich. And that, to me, should be the absolute goal and the mission of all of our cultural institutions as we do this work to tell a complete history of our country and of our state and of our city. Because all that does is make us a better people. Absolutely.
Yeah, Columbia has definitely changed in the last 10 years
100%.
Or even 20 years.
Yeah. And it's intentional too. It's extremely intentional. And I think this kind of work in this kind of space has to be. And like I said, we've been very fortunate in Columbia to have some tremendous leadership over the last 10 years that have been intentional about adding stories and layers to our history and who we are.
We'll be back with more stories from the community after this quick break.
Hey y'all, producer Drew here with an exciting announcement. Recently,
The Columbia Museum of Art has been awarded with the 2026 Governor's Award for the Arts in the Accessibility category. It's really an honor to be recognized by our state for this work, which we find to be absolutely critical to living up to our mission of being welcoming to all. These are exciting times at the CMA, and if you'd like to support what we do here in making art accessible to everyone, maybe it's time to consider becoming a member of the Columbia Museum of Art. Not only will you be helping the museum sustain programs, exhibitions, accessibility initiatives, and even this podcast, but you'll also gain access to a variety of perks, like free admission to the CMA and over 150 other museums in the Southeast, priority registration and discounts for events and classes, complimentary admission for children ages 18 and younger, and so much more. You can learn more about CMA membership on our website, columbiamuseum.org. That's columbiamuseum.org. And now, back to the show.
My name is Darion McCloud. I am the self-proclaimed homeboy artist, director, actor, storyteller, children's literature advocate, teaching artist. I call it the hustle.
Throughout this series, we've been thinking about systems and how they shape memory, power, and visibility. And we've talked about the Orangeburg Massacre on the South Carolina scale, which is a moment that kind of forces us to confront state violence and historical erasure. We've discussed the removal of the Confederate flag from the South Carolina state grounds, which was a nationally mediated event that received public symbolism and sparked conversations about identity and power. Those conversations operate at the level of the state, as well as at the level of a nation. So Rodney McMillian's work reminds us that systems don't just live in headlines or monuments. They live in everyday material, in neighborhoods, and what gets preserved and what gets overlooked. So now I want to bring this conversation home to Columbia, to Duke Avenue, to a lived experience, because systems aren't abstract, they're local,
Right.
They're intimate, they're shaped daily. So I am grateful to be joined by Darion McCloud, a storyteller, a cultural leader, and someone whose life and work is deeply rooted in this city. Welcome, Darion.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. That was a lot to think about just in the intro. That's really good stuff.
Yeah. So I want to get started. I want to talk about how you grew up on Duke Avenue in Columbia.
Nope.
No.
Partially I did.
Okay.
Okay. My mom still lives just a few blocks away.
Mm.
But we did spend 1 year with my parents first, right before they separated, and then right after they separated, we did live on Duke Avenue on that other, Columbia is famous for those broken streets, how it goes and it breaks and it goes down.
Yep.
The weird hill. Mm-hmm. We lived on that part of Duke Avenue.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about that neighborhood, what images, sounds, or even everyday materials that kind of symbolize your upbringing, what carries memory for you?
Oh, I mean, there's so much, like you said, I tell her, I still, some people take offense at this term, but I still use it. I'm a homeboy, I use that with pride. Mm. When I was younger, that was how, you found your people. If you traveled the country and you heard a certain lilt to someone's voice, or you were someone and someone's ordering, I don't know, grits, which by the way, I hate, something, something like that, you get to talk like, yo, what's up? You start talking, you find out, you're a homeboy, So Duke Avenue, College Place, all those neighborhoods, they're my neighborhoods. They have been for 62 years. They still are mine. Duke Avenue holds a kind of weird, specific place because, like I said, my mom and dad, their thing was kind of really disintegrating at that time. But I was like 10 years old. And I remember, I still have very distinct memories. Like the backyard was nothing but a hill. Mm. Literally, you stepped out the back door, you took 3 steps, and you were going down the steepest, biggest hill ever. As a kid, it seemed like Everest. Mm. And I remember we used to ride our bikes down to the bottom of the hill and purposely crash into the fence at the bottom because that's what kids do. You're young and you're indestructible. Oh, yeah, I remember one thing as a child, too. I was very lonely. because we moved from our old neighborhood over to Duke Avenue, and there were no kids. There were no kids. I didn't have any friends. I remember my mom made me go out for baseball because I think she got tired of seeing me sit around and do nothing but read comic books and draw pictures. And I was the world's worst baseball player. I mean, I'm not joking. At that point, I had never played. I'm not a baseball dude. I had never played. I didn't know anything about the game. And I just remember, I can still recall the feeling. They would have like these open tryouts where all the kids would come, and the kids would get a chance to field, and the kids would get a chance at bat. Like if a kid hit a home run, literally the coaches would rush the field and like try to like almost snatch the kid from each other. And I just remember how it felt to not be that kid ever.
No, I understand that. I just I found out from my dad the other day that he told me that I wasn't very good at softball, and he was the softball coach. And so he had me play this game for years thinking that I was good. And then
Did you think you were good?
I thought I was pretty good. I mean, he coached me all throughout the summer. And then just to find out, at the great age of 28 that I wasn't very good was heartbreaking.
The scales fall from my eyes.
Right.
Yeah. But when I, as an adult, I discovered this other end of Duke Avenue where the One Columbia House is. It was actually a home for a Black Business Bureau. But then it became the Indy Grits House for a few years. Indy Grits was the educational arm of the Nickelodeon Theater, the local art house theater here. And I started doing some projects with them. So I got to know the house intimately then. And did some cool stuff, some interesting things. I remember we did one thing. I called it The Feast. And it was kind of a podcast before podcasts. My wife, Michaela, who's an amazing cook, prepared a feast. And we just invited people throughout the neighborhood. And some of my mom's neighbors showed up. And there's one gentleman, I can't remember, this one white dude who had just bought a piece of property in the neighborhood. He showed up. And we sit around and we talked about race and history. It was interesting. I was proud of that. I got some people in the room together who would never have been in a room together or would never have engaged. And we engaged. Food is that natural connector. After 10 minutes of eating and talking, so where you from and all that, you had to cut through all that first. You had to cut through the politeness. And then somebody's got to say something a little awkward. And then somebody goes, hey, well, I think, And then we had some real conversation.
That's funny that you kind of talk about the feast, because one of my questions for you was, in your experience, how does the Black community preserve its history through everyday life? Like through gathering, through food, through oral tradition, celebration.
It's a very human thing. But Black people, especially Southern Black people, is a very specific thing. Like if you're starting a new organization, if you're asking Black people, Black Southern people to attend your inaugural initial meeting, think tank, brainstorm, whatever you're doing, and you tell them that you are going to feed them, you better come correct.
Right.
You better come correct. Because if they walk out of there hungry and dissatisfied, you have already lost points. Because you're right, food is an important thing. Or when you go to a party, a birthday party, it doesn't matter if it's a child or an adult. If the food's not correct, people won't talk about you. So food is like the first step. And I think that's true everywhere, but I know down south that is it's the first test.
Yeah, food is
it's
love.
The first test
down here, especially for the Black community.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about the Nia Company.
Okay.
For the audience who may not know what the Nia Company is, can you talk a little bit about that and those, because you are telling some of those stories that are misrepresented?
Oh yeah, we're doing one now, Wiley and the Hairy Man, which is an African American piece of folklore that's not as popular as the Brer Rabbits or something like that. But we feel it's just as rich. It's just as fun. There's so many similarities. I think the story comes out of Louisiana, but it feels to us this could have easily been Charleston. But NIA is a theater company. It's capital N, small I, capital A, the NIA Theater Company. And we do original adaptations of family story. We call them family. We don't call it children's work, even though it's the same canon. Because for one thing, the kids don't drive themselves there. But the idea also is if grandma, grandpa, dad, or uncle, auntie, if they come, they're going to be just as entertained as the kids are. Maybe for different reasons, maybe for the same reasons. When we're constructing these tales, these stories, we think about appealing to the entire family. We do everything from that to very adventurous adult theater. Passover at Antoinette Nwandu. We did Top Dog Underdog when Top Dog Underdog was brand new, when it first came off Broadway. And it was still this mystical, magical, people didn't know, it's like a scary piece of theater. We did. So we tend to do, I call them the backbreakers. And what we like to say is we don't tell you what to think, but we give you something to think about. So NIA, we've been doing this for 30 years. Oh, well, I just rounded it up. 28 years, 30 years. And hopefully we'll be doing it for another 30.
Yeah, I love that. So you worked in Columbia's cultural landscape for decades.
I've worked in most of the cultural institutions. I've worked here with the museum. When I was here at the museum, I was outreach manager. But I've worked with almost every cultural institution here, like the university to Benedict, to the State Museum, to schools, to you kind of name it.
Yeah. So you've seen Columbia grow and change, and you've seen stories, shift. So
yeah. And like I said, don't forget, I'm a homeboy too.
Right.
So I've definitely watched it grow. I'm probably like a lot of natives. I have things that I think that were cool and things that I think that were not so cool. I think Columbia does some things really well, really great, that are totally underneath the radar.
Yeah.
I'm always getting told by people, oh man, this doesn't even feel like it's in Columbia. This doesn't even feel like it's in Columbia. It's like, I don't think you get out enough in Columbia. I think I like to always say we punch above our weight class. But I still think there's so much untouched, unscratched, undeveloped, whatever you want to call it, potential. And sometimes, as a homeboy, it frustrates me. It frustrates me.
I do want to talk about that frustration as well, because congratulations, because you were recently recognized as one of South Carolina's Black leaders to know.
Oh, thank you.
Which is
thank you.
A big deal.
Yeah, thank you. I call us the Dirty Dozen.
So with that recognition comes visibility, but also responsibility.
It's interesting. Because I am the homeboy, because I am from here, I think a lot of the things I do go unrecognized. Because I'm the kid that grew up around the block. I'm old enough and I've been at this long enough that I'm generational, which I love.
Yeah.
The idea that a kid could go home and tell their parent about their time with me, that's not an idea. That happens on the regular. And I feel very happy and very blessed. That's one of the benefits for those young artists who are out there thinking about relocating. There's a lot of reasons to relocate, but one of the benefits is you get to work in your community. You get to really impact your community in that way.
Right.
If they get to hear my voice, so they get to hear the things at least that I think are important. Now, the other side of that is we always think something from somewhere else is shinier and brighter and more interesting. When I first started telling stories, it was really evident because, my official training was actually as a visual artist. But, when you're storytelling, it's kind of a different engagement. People come and talk to you. And everybody always thought I was from someplace else.
Mm.
And for years, until I got known in the community, everybody always thought I was from someplace else. Like I remember one time, someone asked me where I was from, and I said Colombia. And they went, South America? I was like, no, South Carolina. But Colombia does this thing where we think we're not enough.
Mm.
And it really kind of drives me bananas.
Yeah, I remember back at my days at One Columbia, we'd meet a lot of artists and they would say, oh, I'm selling in Charlotte, I'm selling in Charleston, I'm selling in Greenville. And it's never Columbia, but we have tons and tons of art markets.
My wife owns one.
Yeah, people, they want local work. So I kind of want to talk about this term that you had mentioned in your Post and Courier article, which was hyper-local. So can you explain what hyper-local means?
So when I first started working as an artist, there wasn't even a word for it. I just, I'd had a conversation with a local leader and a friend. I sat on the State House steps just talking one afternoon for hours. And they convinced me to stay in Columbia. I was about to finish school. They convinced me to stay in Columbia. And I wanted to stay also. I went to Arden Elementary. I went to Maurice Alcorn Middle School. I went to C.A. Johnson. I wanted to impact those places. I grew up in College Place. You know, I ran the streets of Columbia. I ran many neighborhoods. Columbia is mine. I mean, I make no bones. Like I said, it better be mine. I've given my life. I've pledged myself to Columbia. I've only been challenged that I went to London. I really seriously thought about moving to London. I fell in love with London.
It's beautiful.
Yes. Oh, I said, oh man, could I? I've been in Columbia for a long time. But I came back. I was talking about, being overlooked, but I at the same time, I'm not overlooked. I'm here now talking with you. I'm in the Post and Courier. My wife is always teasing me, walking down the street. We can't take 10 steps without bumping into, I call them my kids. They're 40 now, they're 40, they're 30, they're 20, whatever, 15 even, whatever, my kids. My mother's 83 and I'm here. I live 5 minutes away from my mother. That's very important to me. So there are tons of reasons, and I've been able, and I want to give this to the local artists too. Quiet as it's kept, there's a lot of opportunity in Columbia. The problem is you have to make it. It's not going to just happen for you. Columbia's not a town that somebody's doing this and they're going to put you on. Like, no, you have the idea that I want to do this. And you have to sometimes build it up from the ground yourself. I built the Nia company here.
Yeah.
I got my own theater company. I have played what I think are some of the great roles of the American stage. Other people may not have heard them, but that's okay. People in Columbia are as important as people anywhere else.
Yeah. I do want to talk a little bit about the younger generation, because you and I, we worked on the tech theater program at One Columbia together. And I'm a theater kid at heart, and I was in costume design, and I absolutely loved it. But I kind of want to talk about something that I was really passionate about in grad school. I wrote my entire thesis on, how we can help Black high school students, or just even Black students who are interested in theater, resources wise. When you're talking about, and when you're thinking about the next generation of young Black creatives that are growing in Columbia right now, what do they need most? Like, is it access? Is it mentorship? Is it protection? What do you think the younger generation needs the most, I guess, is my question.
This is not a cop-out, but it's all of the above. So let me put this on. Okay, think about it. Historically, we're in the Columbia Museum of Art. Okay, my mother did not grow up taking field trips to the Columbia Museum of Art. My mother was not allowed. My mother was not allowed to go to the library. So a lot of that, like my generation, I was born in 1963. the Civil Rights Act is 64, 65.
64.
And then it's South Carolina, so it's, add another 10 years or so on to that, So we don't have the long runway or the traditions or the history in these spaces that, just to be totally honest, that white families do.
Yeah.
So one of the things I loved when I was here, I was outreach manager. And I brought in people who had never been to the museum. A lot of times it was through the kids, but sometimes directly to the adults. Whatever combination worked. And a lot of times the adults would go, "Oh, I've never been in this building before." I'd have adults say, I can't tell you how many times, "I didn't think this building was for us." Literally, verbatim.
I hear it from my family members as well. Yeah.
Exactly. A lot of people are just being introduced to these spaces, just being introduced to the activities that happen in these spaces. So that's all about access. It's all about history. And you're right, protection. I'm glad you said that word because the experience is so different. It's going to look different to different people. When you're thinking about what you're crafting, how you're making your exhibits, how you're building your building, how you're staffing your building, what you're saying, what's the literature you're putting on the wall, what you're saying outside of your building, what's your presence in the community. All of that is important, especially for museums, which are perceived as places where old dead things go, instead of vibrant places where, no, you come here and you learn history. History, this is our history, these are stories, and we do this, we can make these things, we do these things together. Like a lot of people don't think of museums as gathering places. They think of them as exclusive spaces,
Right.
Part of it is, of course, like, we're in a museum, you can't touch things because they're old.
Yeah.
That's the reason. But when you explain it to people, it's like, it's not that, they're more important than you. It's just that it's old. And literally, we want it to be here 100 years from now. And when you touch it, the acids in your skin and the sweat and the moisture in your breath just makes it more vulnerable. It'll start to decompose more, blah, blah, blah. I just love getting that speech to people and seeing the light bulbs go off in their heads.
Yeah.
But yeah, all these things are to be considered to make people feel like it's theirs. Ownership. That's important.
It's like that phrase that art is for everyone.
For everyone. 200 years ago, everybody drew.
Yeah.
Before photographs, before photographs were readily available, and I'm trying to explain something to you, I would draw a picture of it. It used to be everybody sang. If you had visitors over, at the end of the night, you would entertain each other with a song.
Right.
There are warrior cultures where the warriors used to say poetry to themselves to amp themselves up for the battle.
Right. So I do want to end with kind of going back to what you were talking about, how there's classes, there's systems, right? So in Rodney McMillian's work, he really asks us to examine those systems that are shaping our lives. So I guess my question is, what systems in Columbia do you think we need to look at more honestly right now?
Ooh. I think here in this institution or whatever institution, when you're planning programming, and I know it's hard because I'm doing the same thing, but you think about those people who are not in the room and why they are not in the room.
Right.
That's the system right there. And like I said, some of the system is designed for them not to be in the room. If you're working 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week, you ain't got much time for it. Let's be real. But it still can make your life better. That's a challenge. I'm not saying, you're going to sit down, and it's a process also. It's not a one-hit wonder. You don't make a group that's focused on Latin interest and think, oh, well, I've done my work. No, that's the beginning.
Right. We need a bridge.
Right.
Yes.
Right. It's the work. And the work is challenging. There's no two ways about it. But it's the work. It's the work. And it also requires some honesty, too. Like I always say, when you have a conversation and when you get to that part that's uncomfortable, that's where the work is. if we agree all the time, we're agreeing all the time.
Yeah.
If I say something, you go like, well, Darion, I'm not sure about that. So that's where the work is. But what we tend to do is run from the work. And especially our institutions, I think institutions try to find the easiest path. Because it is hard to serve hundreds of thousands of people. Mm-hmm. It's hard. And let's be honest, it's impossible to serve everybody. But you give it your best shot. I think we have to rethink. You're totally correct. The thing about the systems are we are part of them. Mm-hmm. It's not like, oh, the system, and then there's me. No, I'm part of the system. I'm hoping I'm the better part. I'm hoping I'm always challenging the system. Or the system is challenging me sometimes.
Right.
But we have to think differently, and we have to think differently all the time. And as soon as we win, mm-hmm. there's someplace else that's challenging us.
I do think, I heard this term back in 2023, I believe. Everyone talks a lot about creative placemaking, mm-hmm. but nobody ever talks about creative placekeeping. Mm. And I find mm-hmm. that Columbia really needs to start leaning into the creative placekeeping.
I would so agree with you.
We have a lot to offer.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot to offer. And kind of going back to that, we're right there. And everybody mm-hmm. talks about bridging the gap, right? Mm-hmm. But nobody actually wants to bridge that gap to be able to work together. Mm-hmm. In my mind, that's one of the things that I'm like, we really need to start working on this.
You know what? I so, like, the physical manifestation of that is Columbia hates a building that's over 100 years old. Mm. It's like all these cool buildings that we have, a block, you know, their foot traffic, you know, you can walk out of one building and 10 steps later, you're in another building. Columbia knocks all that down, you know. And I know there are people here that think that the buildings are just a physical manifestation, but it runs deeper than that. Mm-hmm. But I know there are people who think that those buildings and those ideas and those situations are important. And they can coexist with new buildings. Mm-hmm. You know, old is not a bad thing.
No. A lot of people don't realize that Columbia has a lot of rich history. Mm-hmm. You know, we're not just knocking down buildings, we're knocking down stories.
Exactly.
We're knocking down people's experiences.
Exactly. These buildings are here as a physical representation of these stories, of ways, of opportunities to challenge us. Even this building. This building used to be a Macy's. Mm-hmm. It was repurposed. The museum before this was over on Senate Street, you know? And I think it had a history even before that. And when I was a child, I used to go to, when I was 8 years old, I used to catch the bus. My mom said her whole family was like mad because she used to turn me loose. And I'd catch the bus, I could come downtown and hang out by myself and all that good stuff. But the museum used to be one of my spots. Mm-hmm. And the planetarium was attached. That was in an old building. There used to be a mansion. There used to be a house. Mm. And I'm sure that house, that mansion, had its stories. I don't know them. Mm-hmm. You know, to me, that was the museum.
Yeah.
You know, like when people walk in here. I worked in this Macy's. When I was in school, I worked on a dock. I worked in this Macy's. Yeah. I'm from here.
Yeah.
I'm from here. So all these buildings have stories. Mm. All these buildings have stories. And when you knock them down, even when you put up a new story, there's a story. The story of that building is it's on an old story. And I think that's a very visible representation of what you just said about placemaking, placekeeping.
Right. And I think that, you know, kind of bridging everything together and kind of piecing it together with Rodney McMillian's exhibition is that he is one of those artists that moved away, you know, but he's bringing it home, you know, and bringing his exhibition and his show here to Columbia, a place where he grew up in. And frankly, I think that that's kind of the start of that creative placekeeping, is coming back home, being able to share your work. I think that's just important, I guess.
I think it's very important.
Yeah. I've returned back to the South every single summer since I was a kid. You know, growing up, I used to get dropped off at my grandparents' house for a summer. So I was always kind of around Columbia at least once or twice a year. But coming back as an adult was completely different. You know, if you think about it, my grandparents always look at the city and they're like, it wasn't like this 10 years ago. So I'm actually navigating a completely new city under completely different circumstances. And it's hard. It's hard, but it's also exciting. Part of the reason that I came up with this idea for the podcast was that I would like to learn, you know, about our South Carolina history, because we always talk about slavery. We always talk about the civil rights movement, and everybody knows those things. Those are general topics. But I wanted to know more about the itty-bitty details of things that no one's talking about, things that are getting erased. I just want these stories to be told, to be heard, to be recognized, to be seen, to create more of that visibility. So someone can kind of look back one day and be like, wow, this is a piece of my history that I didn't know about. You've been listening to Binder, a production of Columbia Museum of Art. Today's episode was hosted by me, Rachel Fludd, produced and edited by Drew Barron, with special assistance from Joel Ryan Cook. You can find a full transcript for today's episode available in our show's notes. For more information about the CMA's exhibition and programs, visit our website, columbiamuseum.org.